Welcome back to the Think 2025 Forum, where we gather important stakeholders to talk about issues that are important from a climate perspective. We are trying to generate a discourse and dialogue towards a progressive Pakistan, which is also sustainable, looking towards 2025 as a milestone. Today, we are very privileged to have a very, very distinguished guest with us. We have with us Mr. Shahzad Qasim. Just to give a brief intro, I think a lot of people already know about Mr. Shahzad Qasim, but I will do the formality. Mr. Shahzad Qasim is currently Special Advisor to the PM for Mining and Minerals. Previously, he's held the power portfolio. He's been Special Advisor on power to the PM, but he has spent a lot of his time in the private sector. Somebody who brings the private sector and the public sector perspective together. He's been in senior positions with AES Power, and more recently as the President for Europe, Middle East, and Africa for years. So, Shahzad sir, thank you very much. I know this is a very, very busy time for you as part of the Nia Pakistan, the Nia administration, which is very busy fixing a lot of structural issues for us. So thank you for taking the time out.
My pleasure. It's a very, very important subject, so I'm glad to be a part of it.
Great. This forum, as I was saying, is really about setting a vision of the future which is very progressive and which is sustainable, which sees Pakistan playing a meaningful part in some of the biggest problems facing the planet. And the biggest one, which is our agenda, which is the climate change and global warming, and us being one of the worst affected countries in the world. I think the onus is on all of the stakeholders to come together and find solutions.
Indeed.
Your current portfolio, sir, is I think, for lack of a better word, is a big contributor in terms of emissions, but we do know that we do need those commodities, those minerals we pull out from the ground. In fact, some of them are contributing towards the clean economy. Like, I'm going to talk to you, a bit about lithium, cobalt, those copper, those elements that are part of the new clean tech economy. But let's just start with talking about the state of mining in Pakistan. What do you see as the potential for mining in the country, and where are you looking at as pockets of opportunity?
Okay, great, thank you. The mining in Pakistan has been, unfortunately, quite a neglected sector until recently. Especially when I say mining sector, I mean large-scale mining. Smaller scale mining has been going on here and there, by and large, I would say, in an unorganized manner. The large-scale mining really got started back in the 70s, 80s with the opening of the Sindak copper and gold facility in Balochistan, which the government of Pakistan actually started in JV with the government of Balochistan. Unfortunately, the technology and the copper market did not help, and it kind of lay dormant for several years before being revived in partnership with the Chinese. For the last about 15 years, it's been doing reasonably well. But other than that, proper commercially based large-scale mine was really started about 10 years ago by a consortium of a Chilean and a Canadian company in a place called Ricodec, which is very close to Sindak.
The famous Ricodec.
The famous Ricodec, or infamous, depending on how you look at it. It was a really good deal. Unfortunately, because of a whole host of reasons, which I'm sure everybody knows by now, that thing got into litigation, and we are now trying to sort of settle that, as the Prime Minister has recently said. We hope to find a reasonable solution to it and get it back on track. So this is on the what we call the metal mining side.
Right.
The other aspect of large-scale mining is, of course, coal, and there, just about 3 years ago, we started work on it, and the first mine has really become operational as of earlier this year, which about 600 megawatts or is it 330? 330 megawatts in operation commercially, and the next 330 under construction. So we finally have proper, organized, highly mechanized and quote and unquote socially responsible mining underway in the country now.
And this took a long time, so this development took a long
indeed.
time. Looking at these reserves since 1990s.
In fact, going back in history, as you mentioned, during my previous life when I was at AES, I have been trying to develop the Thar coal mine since 1994 when I first came to Pakistan.
Wow. Wow.
To develop these two oil-fired projects near Muzaffargarh near Multan. Unfortunately, for a whole host of reasons, we never could get started. So I hats off to Shamsuddin Sheikh and to Engro for having gotten it going, and the government of Sindh, of course, that they've managed to do it. I'm green with envy, but I'm very, very pleased.
Right. No, it's a feat to be cherished, sir. I'm
so
just
now
wondering.
The first phase of it, which you, I think, mentioned earlier, the burning coal for power generation, which is a very big contributor to global warming, is obviously underway, and we do need a certain amount of baseload capacity. But going forward, our main focus is developing now in the area of clean coal technologies, where we hope to utilize coal gasification to feed our fertilizer industry and other petrochemical industries.
Right.
And whether it's coal gasification or coal to liquids, there are several companies that are working on it. Several feasibility studies are underway, and the Prime Minister is very supportive of this because of the environmentally much superior sort of technologies that we can use to make use of our indigenous resource.
Right.
And displace hopefully a lot of imported LNG and imported oil in our market.
So this sounds like a great initiative. I mean, commercially, does it stack up? I mean, the technology is now
it
available
is
and commercially viable.
Absolutely. I think in this part of the world, the largest sort of deployer of this technology is China. By far. And they, for example, produce almost 75% of their fertilizer from syngas using coal.
Wow.
So it's very much viable. The issue is whether our mining can be done at a low enough cost to make the end product viable, and that's what people are working on.
That's the point of evaluation for your team. This is fantastic news, sir. I think power generation, I think globally 40% of power generation is still on coal, but we do see that even mining, as you know, the mining operation is quite intensive, energy intensive. And overall, we've seen contributes between 5 to 11% of overall power requirement demand in the world, and that results in 2% of the global greenhouse gas emissions.
Correct.
And I do know as a fact from our previous conversation that that's a topic of keen interest for you on how we can bring the renewable technology, renewable power to mining operation. So do you want to comment on what are some of the initiatives you're thinking about?
First of all, I'm sure you're aware, the government is making a big push on renewable energy as part of our integrated energy planning.
Absolutely. So the headline number is
strategy. As you know, 30%.
30%, which is quite ambitious.
It's very ambitious. But I think that's the right way to do it because, as you know, our current base load stock of power generation is relatively high cost. And so in addition to sort of being the right thing to do from an environmental standpoint, it is also very sensible from an economic standpoint because right now the all-in cost of renewable energy, especially solar and wind, is less than the incremental cost of many of the thermal technologies.
Absolutely.
So therefore, we hope to bring down the overall cost of power by adding these renewable technologies. So that's one. The other side, within mining, I'm encouraging our mining operators to utilize solar power and wind, especially those in Balochistan, where, as you know, along the Chaghi belt
nice wind
has
corridor.
one of the best wind corridors. So instead of burning diesel or fuel oil or other sources to generate their power, they ought to use renewable. It's a very sort of, I think overall it will help them reduce their input costs and reduce their carbon footprint. I think it's a win-win situation.
Absolutely. So my own organization has contributed slightly to the third coal mine, where we've set up a 5 megawatt solar plant.
That's
For
excellent.
the diesel pumping facility, and
That's excellent.
hopefully that's going to save the coal mine around 80 to 100 million a year just on diesel costs.
Excellent.
Along with a lot of savings on the carbon side.
That's right.
It's equivalent to planting around 250,000 trees.
That's right.
I know the government is planting 10 billion trees.
That's
but
right.
This is a small contribution
Indeed.
to the 10 billion tree tsunami.
Indeed.
But you're right, Asad, this is something that excites us as a renewable company in terms of how much of that energy we can displace. And I think a lot of these mines are in off-grid locations. In fact, most of them are in off-grid locations.
Are off-grid.
And sometimes we see that even, the energy around the mine as a concept. So you have communities
Correct.
which are employed in the mining process, operation, which don't have access to the grid.
Correct.
And that, to us, is quite a striking, conflict or contradiction.
No, I think it's very important, and just to take an example, what I'm trying to use as a pilot project is to use solar. I'm encouraging the Sindak Metals Board to replace their oil-fired generation with solar power.
Fantastic.
And maybe a hybrid solar wind, because given where it is located,
Right.
there's about 40 megawatts that they use for their own mining and the smelter, and also to supply some of the communities around the complex. So if we can replace that with wind and solar, I think it'll be a huge win for everyone.
Fantastic. So we see a lot of these ideas in the system, and I think we're glad you're thinking in that direction. But the mechanics and the incentives are such that we see a lot of subsidy right now going towards fossil fuel. Let me just give an example. When we talk about fossil fuel-based power generation, there are all sorts of incentives in terms of long-term contracts, take-or-pay contracts, dollar-pegged, sovereign guarantees being thrown at these operations. Whereas if you look towards the other side, I mean, renewables are called out for attracting subsidies, but right now, if you look at the net subsidy going to renewable, is quite negative. So that's there's a kind of a conflict between what the government wants to do and how the incentives are set up. Another example, sir, is the gas subsidy for what we used to call the zero-rated industry, the exporters. Again, we are incentivizing the exporters who need cheap power to burn gas very inefficiently in those captive power plants. There's about 6 to 7 gigawatt of that power.
Agreed.
So are you guys thinking about that? Is the cabinet debating this issue? Because I feel that a big part of policy is incentives. And are the incentives lined up in the most priority areas? If renewable is priority, then are we incentivizing renewable? If off-grid is priority, then are we incentivizing off-grid?
No, I think as far as the government's incentives are concerned, I'm sure the Ministry of Power is looking at all the things that you mentioned. And in fact, I know they are. So to the extent of providing actual subsidy on gas and all of that stuff, I think we certainly ought to consider substituting let's say, solar power, instead of using gas to produce power, I think it will be much cheaper, as well as conserve a scarce resource. As you know, with our local gas is pretty much gone.
On a declining trend, sir,
and
already quite scarce.
The subsidy that we have to give now comes off of LNG price, which is close to $9.5 a million BTU.
Indeed.
So therefore, I think the economics are there. So I'm sure the Ministry of Power will be looking at all of this stuff.
Right. So I know that talking about developed economies and the structures in those economies probably is not like for like comparison, but there's a coalition of about 50 countries which have signed up to moving away from coal as part of the Paris Agreement. And I was following what's happening in Canada, which is a big sort of mining and natural mineral sort of exporting country, and in fact oil and gas as well. I think it's a big export for Canada. And what they've done is they have explicitly set local carbon targets for the mining industry. And they realize that's a big contributor because of being a mining-driven economy. And what they're doing is, on a tightening scale, they reset those targets every year so that they're compliant with the Paris Agreement, the limits they've signed up to the Paris Agreement. Mm-hmm. Is that something you're thinking about, setting carbon limits on mining? Maybe that as a way of incentivizing move towards renewable power.
I think as we update all our mining and minerals policies, as I mentioned earlier, this government is very interested in developing the mining sector. Right. So as a result, we are going to review and update all our federal as well as provincial mining policies. As you know, mining is really a provincial subject.
Right.
What we will do at the federal level is help the provinces incorporate these kinds of thinking into the policies that they put in, on the basis of which the investment will be made. So yes, we certainly will encourage use of best possible technologies to reduce their carbon and other environmental footprints.
Right. So there are lots of ideas, I think, in the system. I think as part of this dialogue, a lot of people have come forward and shared certain concepts. We would love to share, the conclusion in a paper.
Absolutely.
With you on that, and how we can
look forward to all the input. Absolutely.
So one part of climate challenge is the gory picture that everybody paints, that Pakistan being one of the worst affected countries, reducing water level in irrigation getting impacted, and that impacting food chain and all of the social upheavals that follow. But the other side of it is the opportunity, the huge opportunity. And I was recently at a conference where they were talking about raising the current level of investment from $400 billion to right up to $4 trillion if we are to stay off 1.5 degree plus rise in temperature. And the thing that caught my attention was, at 2 degrees, 80% of the coral reef will die. So that's something right at the bottom of the food chain.
That's right.
And that impacts everything. So
exactly.
The only thing predictable in this whole equation is the temperature.
That's right.
The temperature rise you can predict to a certain level of accuracy.
That's right.
Everything else is unpredictable.
Correct.
So to stave that off, the investment has to go from $400 billion to $4 trillion.
That's right.
And what hit us at that time is that, what part are we going to play in that unprecedented reindustrialization of the world towards cleaner fuels, towards cleaner power generation, cleaner transport, energy efficiency, climate adaptation. And I think if I bring that to mining, us as a renewable company, we think about indigenization. We import a lot of equipment right now in Pakistan.
Correct.
That causes your trade deficit.
That's right.
Also, that doesn't utilize indigenous resources. The kind of metals and elements that become important in the climate economy are things like cobalt, that nobody used to mine. I mean, cobalt deposit used to be right next to copper deposits in certain cases, but nobody bothered to mine them.
That's right.
But now cobalt has become one of those very expensive minerals which is required for the batteries for electric cars.
That's
Similarly, sir, there's copper, of course, has always been very important, but now it's become very, very important because of electric cars and batteries, and there's lithium, silicon dioxide, all of those new age metals. So is there a thinking in your team which is thinking about oil of the future, these super minerals of the future.
Absolutely.
Will be part of the green economy, this climate economy?
I don't want to, what's the word for it, let the cat out of the bag yet.
Right.
But we are certainly thinking of all of those things. The new mining strategy, which we'll come up with in the next within the next few months, inshallah, will be addressing some of these.
Right. So do we have these deposits? Do we have these new minerals?
Strategic metals, strategic materials that you were talking about. We've just completed a geochemical map of Pakistan with the Geological Survey of Pakistan and the Geological Survey of China recently. Now, on the basis of that, we are zeroing in, doing the next level of analysis to really determine what areas we will be exploring further to determine which materials are available in what quantity. And
so by when do you think that will be available? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people in the industry would love to.
Indeed. This is probably the process will probably take about 3 to 5 years.
Wow, right.
It's a long process and a very expensive process.
I can imagine.
But
and this, with the latest technology, it's going to take us 3 to 5 years.
That's right, to really get things moving.
Right.
But we should have a reasonably good idea of what we have under the ground in the next couple of years, I would say.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic.
So,
because if we as businesses get pressure from the government for indigenization and for import substitution.
Absolutely.
For us to effectively do that, the supply chain needs to be available.
Correct.
And supply chain right down from the first principle of, what goes into creating those new products like solar panels, wind turbines, batteries.
That's right.
So we need all of those new minerals, and I think this is one way the government can set up a platform.
That's right.
For the new industry.
For indigenous, for local manufacture or local even assembly of some of the alternate energy equipment, for example, you don't have to wait to find all the material locally. Even if we can start with, like they did in the automobile industry.
Right.
Initially, just sort of assemble, and then go to import substitution or deletion, whatever they call it in the vernacular. I think that would be a huge change in the value add.
Absolutely. And you notice that it's already happening. So it's a demand and supply thing.
No, but the point is, given the fact that we are shooting to get to 30%, I think that should give
there's enough
demand. The demand is there.
There's enough demand in the system. So absolutely, I think you'll see once that policy takes hold and people can see a roadmap towards achieving that, you will see a lot of indigenization. I can tell you that when we started the solar business, we were set at probably 30% indigenization, which means just labor. Right now, probably we'd be more closer to 50 to 60% indigenization, and I think the industry, with the demand that's picking up, is heading more towards 60, 70%. Even panels are being, a lot of companies are now putting up assembly plants.
Excellent.
So I think it's just a matter of time that it might, it's happening, but you have to manufacture at a commercially viable price point.
Obviously.
And there you're competing with the Chinese who are like fully integrated in their supply chain. So I think that's the challenge we have. So I just do want to touch upon your previous portfolio, because I know that you spent most of your career in the power sector. And we see power as being the central issue within the Pakistani economy. The twin deficits, and I think you've discussed enough in the media. They originate from the imported fuel problem, the SOEs problem, the state-owned enterprises, which are primarily energy companies, distribution companies.
Correct.
So even now, we don't see the structural problems within the system being resolved. And I'll give you an example. One of the root causes we see is single buyer, single seller. Government buys all the power in the system. And we can prove with evidence historically it's bought power at more expensive rate than what the market would be willing to pay.
That's right.
And it's still losing 20-25% of that power in the system as a single seller.
That's right.
So unless that system is disrupted, we don't see a substantial change in the outcome going forward, even if the government raises the sukuk and raises the price on
No,
the
no,
sand.
see, raising the sukuk and stuff is sort of stopgap measures.
Stopgap measure.
We all, I think, understand that. The key to solving this conundrum is, of course, reducing the losses in the system. That's the key. The other major issue is, of course, the cost of generation. For a whole host of reasons, not the least of which is the fact that we are financing 30-year assets with 10, 12-year debt. The capacity payments that our IPPs are subjected to are very, very high for the first 10 to 12 years. After that, the prices fall and then, they're more reasonable.
Indeed, once the debt is paid off.
But during the first 10 to 15 years of these projects' lives, the capacity payments are very, very high. So, I mean, that is something my colleagues in the Ministry of Power are looking at to see how we can sort of extend the length of the payment periods so that those
costs get flattened out.
The front-loaded nature of our PPAs is improved.
Right.
So that's sort of one way to deal with it. The other, of course, is to reduce the losses in the distribution and transmission system. And that, I think there's a lot of debate within the government as well. And there are many points of view. I, of course, as you might imagine, am firmly in the corner of, the only way to fix this is privatization. As we've seen in the case of KESC, which used to be at 40% losses. And in about 7 to 8 years, they brought it down to below 20.
Yeah. Do you think that that's practically going to happen? I mean, previous governments have aborted half-baked attempts.
I think at the right time,
Right.
we will have to do it.
Right.
Because the status quo really is not sustainable.
Yeah.
Although right now the Ministry of Power is doing a lot of good work, but the point is this is not sustainable. As soon as people get transferred, moved out, you go back to, because really the public sector running these businesses just doesn't work.
Right, fantastic. So thank you very much for your time. I think there are lots of questions on my head right now because, I mean, you've got such an extensive background. We always, when we meet, I mean, I've met you once previously and we always learn so much from you. There's this small sort of rapid fire that I would like to do with you. It's a rapid fire question round.
All right.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw some items at you and you can use long or short against them. And long would be if you're confident, positive about the future of that item.
Okay.
For example, climate change. And if you say long, then that's a problem that will stay.
That's right.
And if you're pessimistic about the future of that item, then you can say short.
Okay.
So can we do that rapid fire?
All right.
Right. So here we go. Mining sector in Pakistan.
Long.
Coal mining.
Also long.
Wow. Right. Pakistani
Because
economy.
because of clean tech.
Because of clean coal. So I mean, I'm still getting my head around the clean coal term. But
It's an oxymoron almost, but
exactly.
it is there.
We'll believe it when we see it.
That's right.
Pakistani economy.
Long.
Long in the short term, sir?
In the short term, it is probably going to be more pain before we get out of the legacy that we've received.
Right.
But I think all macro indicators are improving.
Yeah.
So hopefully the other stuff will line up.
Fantastic. So Pakistan's commitment to the Paris Agreement.
I think it's got to be long.
Fantastic. Shahzad sir, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure. Thank you for coming to the 2025 dialogue. We hope we can continue to learn from your ideas, your experiences, and can have a useful, productive dialogue on the future of this country. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.